My name's Dale and I own many properties, which most are for rent. I try my best to keep my tenants happy and comfortable within my places. Not to sound like a creep, but in a way it feels like I look after these people like they're my own kids, since I had never had any of my own or even a life. Partner, for that matter. So I like to keep them happy and at times check in to make sure their needs are met. One particular time, on the end of every month, I go to collect the rent, and most of which is money transferred and online, which just makes things easier. Usually all would be accounted for, but this one tenant who I knew liked his alone time never paid up. I waited a few days to give him time since. I just thought he was a little late, but those days went by and nothing, a week later, and still nothing. Being a landlord, you have to make rough decisions at times and requires to be stern at times, which I hate doing cause naturally. I'm a genuinely nice person, and in this case, I thought I would have to put my foot down. I waited till mid-month, and it was time I would step in and pay a visit. When I arrived to the residence, I met one of my tenants outside taking the leaves. I asked about their fellow tenant who was late on the rent, and they said he hadn't been around for a few months, which was weird because I had the previous month's rent, and how would that even be possible? As dark and morbid as it can be, I thought I had one of those suicides in the room he rented. It's common and a scary thing to go through. The discovering of a body is something I had to deal with maybe 2 to 3 times a year. When I went to knock on the door, I was met by a pushing on the door which just indicated the window was open and the window pressure pushing against the wood. I waited a few minutes before entering the room and had one of my good tenants with me since he was curious also. When walking in the room, we were hit in the face with a strong, heavy smell of bleach. Immediately, I knew what was going on. The tenant accompanying me immediately shook his head, and even he knew what had happened was not a good sign. As we walked around with a sort of investigation, we found the place nearly empty with little to no furniture. A mattress in the living with a few bowls and cups, no TV or couch, a bag of laundry and old dried food on the countertop. When we got to the back bathroom, I told my tenant to hold back a few steps behind me, 'cause what we were about to find was not going to be pretty at all. I stood holding the bathroom door handle and slowly turning the handle and opened the door with a gentle push. There laid my tenant in the bathtub, sunken to the bottom with his feet sticking out from the top. I looked around the bathroom and found a few bottles of empty embalming fluid and a couple dozen bleach bottles lined up against the wall. I sat on the toilet and took out my phone and immediately called the proper people to handle this kind of situation. It didn't take long for a few police units to arrive along with a coroner van to come and fish him out of the tub, which I'm sure wasn't an easy thing to do, 'cause he could have been in there for weeks, a month the most. After a few hours of letting them do their work, they brought out the body in a white plastic wrap, and since they found he had no kin, family at all, I had to identify him, or what was left of him. When I approached the plastic where they had his remains, they opened a Velcro flap and showed me. I could help but wince at the state of him, which was surprisingly nearly intact and not rotted, as some would expect. His skin was white as snow, mouth wide open in the most hauntingly manner and eyes glossed over and sunken in, hair a bright blonde from the bleach, obviously, and without a doubt it was him. After that whole ordeal and saddened turn of events, I had a cleaning crew who I've used before for this kind of situation. I was bothered by this more than I should have been, so I had that room closed off and boarded up till I felt it was right to rent it out again. A month after that situation, I had already moved my thoughts about it. I reopened the room and rented it to a nice young couple who needed a place ASAP. I thought there couldn't no harm. They knew what had happened and didn't bother them. None so. No harm done. Nice and quiet they were, friendly to the other tenants, and worked good jobs, just the kind of people I liked. As I was sitting at home after having a nice full dinner and a movie, I fell asleep on my armchair where I did most of my sleeping. I fell into a deep sleep and dreamed of entering that room. I could feel the cold door handle and smell that smell of bleach. I dreamed of opening that door once more. And when I entered, I seen the tenant sitting up in the bathtub with his mouth wide open and closed eyes. His head turned towards me slowly as I tried to move from fear, but couldn't budge an inch. I had no choice but to stare at the tenant as he stared back at me with his eyes nearly closed and white face. I screamed as loud as I could while trying to move my body, and I quickly found myself back in my armchair, screaming from the dream and back into reality. The high anxiety and fear in my heart caused me to have a panic attack, which prompted me to turn on all my lights for the rest of that night. It's been 2 years since that incident, and at least twice a week, I have the same dream of the tenant, but each time I do, it seems like he's crawling further and further and further away from the bathtub, to the point where I can feel his still fingers squeezing my shoulders. I'm in therapy because of this dream and experience, and at times I wonder if he's haunting me. If so, then why is he haunting me? I really do hope that the dreams stop sooner or later, but until then, I take my medication and wait to stop seeing his haunting wild face and blackened eyes. I am that one kid who never pays attention, always sitting there watching the class go by, nothing interesting to talk about. Although everyone knows me in class, no one talks to me. Yeah, they call my name a few times, but that was it. I was all alone. Alone was a strong phrase, I thought, as I trailed slowly to my English class after lunch. My class is just chaos. There's this kid called Para, who was a class clown. He was loud even when he was calling his friend's name. You can hear him. He sat in the middle row opposite me in English. I sit by the window on the right, and his friends Santi and Lenny in the middle row, one behind each other. Our teacher, Mrs. Watts, cannot teach. Our class of 27 pupils always talk over her or do their own thing, so life in her class is hard. I, on the other hand, never do her work. None of the class do. I leaned against my chair as I listened intensely on what the girls behind me were saying. I couldn't hear properly due to the class talking over each other, and Ms. Watts' monotonous be quiet work on your own shouting. I tucked my chair in and pulled my dark bag closer to me so I can read my book in peace. The girls stopped whispering and carried on talking in their normal voices. They said something about a missing class and compared it to ours. I shrugged off what they were saying and turned back to my book. Para was being annoyingly loud again. He got up and took Lenny's equipment, who smirked and made a big deal out of it. Para did this a few times while Miss Watts was telling him off and sanctioning him with a warning. After a while, Para got bored as he hummed to himself and drew in his book. I kept getting distracted as I looked around at my class, who were talking, eating, looking at Miss Watts, trying to get Santi's attention and mimicking our teacher. Aka. I jolted in my seat as I turned to face Para, who waved to catch my attention. All eyes were on me, wondering why a popular kid wanted to talk to a girl like me. Okay, Allow open the blinds and pull the window up. Is bear hot in here. Para shouted across to me as I did what any person would do. I got up, walked over to the window, and... No, 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 Ms. Watts yelled as she lunged towards me. Her dirty blonde hair draped against her shoulders, black trousers, and her light blue blouse fluttered around her. I felt like all the air was sucked out of me as her hands wrapped around my neck. She stood there facing me. Get away from there. What is wrong with you? Miss, I just asked her to. Oh, open the window. I heard a familiar voice as my neck turned over to Para, who was already up and next to Miss Watts, who ignored his reply. The whole class was silent as Miss Watts mumbled to herself. Each utter progressively got louder as she realized what she had done. My neck was free as I let out a gasp of relief, but the class, they were stunned. Ms. Watts walked slowly back to her seat. Each foot she put in front of the other was dragged, and her body was slouched. I can still feel her nails digging into my neck as I rubbed the sides with my hand. Para, on the other hand, he didn't move. He just stared into my soul. Miss What Was Tea? That a stutter broke the silence as all of us turned our head to Santi. His long black straight hair covered his brown eyes. Black hoodie, even though he wasn't allowed to wear one, and a facial expression that was hard to explain what he was feeling. She didn't answer. She was seated in her chair, her dark eyes looking at the white desk in front of her. Everyone came out of their shocked position and started speaking quickly about the incident. I just stared at Para, who was breathing heavily as if he just ran a lap. Aka. Hey, are you... Okay, he walked up to me, his hands in his pocket, and a sympathetic look edged across his face, his cheeks flushed pink as I smiled at him. Yeah, I don't know what that was. I trailed off as I noticed everyone was moving towards the door as well as looking at me. Ms. Watts was still in her position as everyone was in a confused state, still wondering what just happened. I apologized to Para as I grabbed my things and came back beside him. For some reason, I didn't feel annoyed or angry at the situation, just weirded out by it. Why would she do that? I know everyone was asking the same question as me. What? What do you mean, open up this door? Lenny, a close friend to Santi and Para, was banging upon the door like a hooligan. His shouts became louder as he pounded his fists like an animal who wants food. Lenny. What are you doing? What are you doing? Who is talking to you? Santi asked as he rushed to his friend, who turned around with a disgusted look on his face. Look at me, bro. I hate this dumbass teacher. I'm out, man. I ain't staying here. Lenny hissed to Santi, who rolled his eyes with a smirk. Both of them walked up to the door. Why was they so desperate to get out? I mean, nothing actually happened. We were just waiting for Miss Watts to carry on with her lecture upon poems, but she wasn't. My eyes darted to Miss Watts, who looked gray-ish to me. Her blonde hair was messed up completely to the core, as well as her clothes, which had holes planted on it. I gasped as I noticed what she was doing. Long red lines were on her neck as her nails scratched up then down. While we were panicking, even though the incident was harmless to me, Ms. Watts became more insane, worse than before. The door was locked. Santi and Lenny complained to Miss Watts, but she never did anything. only scratching herself. The air was hot as everyone banged upon the walls, and the only way out of the English classroom was the locked door. "Miss, I need to go toilet." Hey, hello," one of my classmates shouted. They were moving their hand over Miss Watts' eyes to get her attention, but it was no use. She was still in the same position. That's when we heard it. We don't know where it came from. The chilling scream engulfed the classroom. It wasn't just regular shriek. It was far more blood-curdling as the voice cracked in half. It was as if the victim was being crushed brutally. The scream. No one could identify if it was a male or female. Everyone knew that we had to get out of this room. That was the only thought that edged across the minds of the 14-year-olds. Get the hell out of there. What was that? The whole class started panicking. All of us huddled together in case something might happen. We didn't think, just acted on instinct. The only person who wasn't near us was me. Her dark, long hair, layer of lip gloss on her lips, and a calm energy that was closer to us. She was popular. Amongst every one of the popular girls, me was the most prettiest one. I thought she dated Para. They would have been a power couple, but I doubt they would get along with each other. I was relieved they weren't dating. She stood there glaring at Ms. Watts coldly. All of us whispered to me to come over here, but she didn't. "Guys, don't move. Stay over there. I'm going to work out where that scream came from," I muttered to us as she paced around the room, looking at Ms. Watts, then at the walls. The scream didn't come from this room, nor did it come from outside this room. In fact, the halls were quiet. It was the end of English period. Shouldn't there be people walking to science or maths? Whatever their subject was, no one was going. The only view we had of the hallways was the locked door and the small square window. It only showed the red locker and the big light blue door to our left. Listen to me. Wherever that scream came from, it's not our problem now, is it? We should just focus on getting out of here. The popular girl from before who was sitting behind me, she said that she walked slowly, holding her hands out to calm me down, even though she wasn't showing any emotion of fear. Yes, it is our problem. There could be a school shooting. Or I don't know. I don't want to be here, Riley, okay? I repiled as she turned around so her back was facing us. The scream sounded like it came from outside the window. Maybe it was someone messing around. We shouldn't jump to conclusion, guys. She then turned around facing us. She was smiling faintly as her hands played with the end part of the table. Aye, come on! Come over here! Para and Lenny bellowed at the same time as half of the class hushed them. I looked at Para, who made his way to the wall and leaned against it, while Lenny and his dark blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smirk of satisfaction due to him arguing with me. Now that's a power couple. Para, I whispered as he adjusted his position. I then crept up towards him, his long, curly brown hair, hazel eyes and freckles and brown skin tone matching mine. I went beside him. We both watched the class come up with an idea to escape as well as asking me to join them. But my focus turned to Miss Watts. Ms. Watts was weird, but she never acted like this, obviously. But the class, they look like they've seen this happen. It was just me that was paying attention to her, no one else. Everyone ignored her presence whilst I was trying to figure out why she was looking like she was now. That's when we all heard it again. I wish we understood what Miss Watts was saying. A loud scream stabbed my sides as my legs gave way. I quickly covered my ears. It echoed, and it was longer than before. We all knew that it didn't come from outside the English door. Everyone was coping my act as we buried our heads into the carpet, bellowing at each other to close the window, because that's what was making our ears bleed. My hands pressed hard onto either side of my ears as my eyes lingered onto Para, who was trying to calm me down and not let go of my position. I panicked as I watched him get up and sprint to the big blue window where I sat previously. The air inside me escaped as I screamed. It was more powerful. I didn't know how I screamed like that, but I made sure Para heard me. Everyone was crouched onto the ground except him. Everyone was focused on the pain that slashed our ears and body, but me. I had to bear the agony that consumed my brain. I scrambled up to grab Para. He was already at the window, but I was too late. Echoes of yells and gasps drummed in my ears as all of us spun around towards the locked door that burst open. All of us instantly recognized these people as they stormed in with weapons of all kinds. They grabbed Para as he bellowed and begged. I closed my eyes as he winced and pleaded. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was preserved in a position that was unexplainable. I was alone. Again. That was a strong phrase. For some reason, after that incident, we weren't allowed to look out of any window. Pyrrha tried to close it when we heard that scream. All of us had a sudden urge of what was out there, he knew. But whatever was out there was alone. Not really, because when the second scream was heard, it sounded different from the first. It sounded like the victims were being crushed brutally. However, something was off about this second scream. After replaying it over again in my head, I was able to work out what it sounded like. Us.